The mansion stood tall, elegant, and cold, much like the boy who lived inside it. Ethan, just 8 years old, was the son of Daniel Wright, a self-made millionaire and single father. From the outside, they looked like the perfect family: wealth, status, everything money could buy. But behind the tall gates and endless rooms, there was only silence and sorrow. Ethan hadn't smiled in years. Since his mother's sudden passing, he shut himself away from everyone, refusing to speak, refusing to play. Dozens of nannies had come and gone, some leaving in tears, others in anger. "He's impossible," they'd say, slamming the door behind them. Daniel, buried in work and guilt, didn't know how to reach his son anymore. One evening, as Daniel sat in his office reviewing yet another resignation letter, his heart sank. He wasn't afraid of boardrooms or billion-dollar deals, but the thought of losing his son to loneliness terrified him. "Maybe he just doesn't need anyone," Daniel whispered to himself, though deep down, he knew Ethan's heart was simply waiting for the right person to unlock it. That's when Maria entered their lives. She wasn't like the others. She didn't have a polished resume or glowing references. She was a poor woman, desperate for work, carrying only a kind smile and a quiet strength. Nobody could have guessed that she, of all people, would be the one to change everything. Maria stood nervously at the mansion gates, clutching the worn strap of her handbag. She wasn't the type of woman you'd expect to see working in a millionaire's home. She was a widow, raising 2 young children of her own in a tiny apartment across town. Life had been hard, but kindness had always been her anchor. When the agency called her about the job, she almost laughed. "A millionaire's nanny? They'll never hire me." But desperation pushed her to try. Daniel noticed it right away. Her clothes weren't expensive, her shoes slightly worn. Yet, there was something in her eyes that stopped him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't fear. It was sincerity. After so many polished applicants who had failed, he surprised himself by saying, "You start tomorrow." That night, Maria whispered a prayer. She didn't have fancy toys, tricks, or child psychology degrees. But she knew one thing: children didn't need perfection, they needed love. The next morning, she met Ethan. He sat at the far end of the room, arms crossed, eyes cold. He didn't even look up when she spoke. Most nannies would have tried to win him over with gifts or sweet voices. Maria didn't. She simply sat on the floor, pulled out an apple from her bag, and began peeling it. Quiet. Patient. Present. For the first time in months, Ethan's eyes flickered with curiosity. He didn't speak, but he moved a little closer. It wasn't much, but to Maria, it was the beginning of something powerful. She smiled gently, as if she had all the time in the world. Because sometimes, the first step to healing isn't grand gestures, it's just sitting close enough to show you care. The first week was silent. Ethan barely acknowledged Maria, and Daniel watched from a distance, expecting yet another failure. But Maria never pushed, never demanded. She just showed up every morning, humming softly while she tidied, cooking simple meals that smelled like home, and leaving an apple on the table, always peeled, always waiting. One rainy afternoon, Maria noticed Ethan sitting by the window, staring at the storm. Instead of asking him what was wrong, she sat beside him with a sketchpad and quietly began to draw the raindrops. Ethan peeked at her hand. Her drawings weren't perfect, but they were alive. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Ethan reached for the pencil. Maria said nothing. She simply handed it to him and watched as he began to sketch clumsy lines. For the first time in years, his little fingers weren't gripping anger, they were creating something. Later that evening, Daniel came home to a sight that made him freeze: Ethan and Maria sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers filled with childish doodles. Ethan wasn't smiling yet, but the hardness in his eyes had softened. That night, Daniel found himself whispering, "Maybe she's different." The next day, Maria surprised Ethan with a tiny wooden toy she'd carved herself. "Made this when I was a girl," she said. Ethan touched it carefully, then placed it on his desk without a word. But that night, Daniel noticed the toy sitting on Ethan's nightstand, right next to his mother's photograph. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, Daniel knew, Maria had found a way into Ethan's world, through patience, love, and the courage to wait for his heart to open. Weeks passed, and little by little, Maria became a quiet presence Ethan couldn't ignore. She never scolded him for his silence, never forced him to play. Instead, she invited him into moments, small, ordinary acts that carried warmth. Baking bread together. Watering the garden. Reading aloud even when he pretended not to listen. One Saturday, Daniel had to attend a late meeting, leaving Ethan and Maria alone for dinner. She made a simple meal, spaghetti with homemade sauce. As they sat down, Maria clumsily twirled her pasta, and the noodles slipped, splattering sauce across her apron. She gasped dramatically, widened her eyes, and whispered, "Don't tell anyone, I just attacked myself with spaghetti." For a heartbeat, Ethan blinked at her, and then, the sound Daniel hadn't heard in years filled the room. A laugh. Small, unsure, but real. Maria's heart swelled. She laughed with him, not making it a big moment, just letting it be. When Daniel returned home that night, he found Ethan asleep on the couch, clutching a small sketch of a smiling stick figure, Maria holding his hand. Daniel stood frozen, his chest tightening. He hadn't seen his son draw a smile since his wife's death. Maria quietly covered Ethan with a blanket. "He laughed tonight," she whispered. Daniel turned, eyes shining with tears he didn't expect. For the first time, he felt hope. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about healing a family that had been broken too long. And Maria, with nothing but patience and kindness, was stitching the pieces back together, one smile at a time. From that night on, the change was undeniable. Ethan began speaking in short sentences, asking small questions, even laughing now and then. The mansion, once filled with silence, slowly came alive with the sound of footsteps, chatter, and the kind of joy money could never buy. Maria didn't work miracles overnight, she simply kept showing up. She taught Ethan how to plant flowers in the garden, how to bake cookies, how to share stories of his mother without letting the sadness swallow him whole. She never tried to replace what was lost. She only gave him space to heal. One sunny afternoon, Daniel walked outside to find Ethan and Maria playing soccer on the lawn. Ethan's cheeks were flushed, his laughter loud, his eyes sparkling in a way Daniel had almost forgotten existed. And then it happened. Ethan turned, spotted his father, and ran toward him. "Dad," he shouted, throwing himself into Daniel's arms. Daniel froze, stunned. It was the first time Ethan had called him dad in years. Tears blurred his vision as he hugged his son tighter than ever before. Over Ethan's shoulder, he met Maria's gaze. She wasn't smiling proudly or seeking credit. She simply looked grateful, happy that Ethan had found his way back. In that moment, Daniel understood something no fortune could teach him: love doesn't come from wealth, but from selflessness. Maria had given his son the one gift he couldn't buy: joy. Months later, the mansion wasn't just a house. It was a home. And at the heart of it was a woman who came with nothing but kindness, and gave them back everything that truly mattered.